video for how to make a good selection. If you are going to put together multiple photographs in any composition, the first thing you need to do is to make a realistic selection of the object to drag into your other photograph. So I've chosen this photograph because it is a furry animal and because it is on a black background, which will make it easier to see how you make selections. There's a lot of different ways to make a selection, but the way that we're going to make a selection today is with the quick selection tool, which is right here. The quick selection tool will give you a brush that you can adjust with the brackets on your keyboard to make bigger or smaller, just like anything else. And when you click and drag over an object, it will find the edge of that object. And anything with these are little marching ants, that's what these are called, these things that are moving. That means that that is what is selected. And see, I just made my brush a little bit smaller, because if you make your brush smaller, it makes your selection more specific so that you can get whatever you want on there. Now notice I was trying to get down here by his fingernail and it selected the whole bottom half, and I don't want that to happen, but no need to freak out, because you can press the Alt button, which changes it from plus to minus, right? And I can drag over this black part that I do not want to be part of my selection, and it will subtract it from my selection. Okay, I do want to say again that this is going to be relatively easy to make this selection because he is a white animal on a black background, and Photoshop can very easily find the edge of him. If you are using a photograph that does not have a very defined edge, or your background is a bit more busy, then you're going to have to do a little bit more work to make a good selection. But the work is worth it, because if you don't make a good selection, then your manipulation, your montage, whatever you're doing with this photograph is not going to look realistic. Okay, so my suggestion to you with the quick selection tool is to go around and get the best selection that you can right here, right? You can even, zoom in there and make sure that you're getting all these little parts in here the way that you want them to be, right? Yeah, so do the best you can with the quick selection tool, step 1, right? I'm actually going to deselect this. You go to select and deselect, because I want to show you one more thing that Photoshop has. And maybe you try this first, because this might be easier. If you are on a selection tool, like the quick selection tool, you'll see up here where it says select subject. You can click on this and it's going to make a selection of your subject. It is a pretty darn good job. If you think about what Photoshop actually has to do here to find it on its own. And then maybe you could start there, and then you can, clean it up a little bit where it needs to be cleaned up, and maybe that'll save you some time. And that would be fine. You can do that. If Photoshop will read your selection, will read your subject for you. So after you do this is just step 1. Once you get the quick selection, the rough selection we'll call it, selected, I like to right click and say save selection and name it rough selection, and say okay, because if you accidentally lose that selection, you're going to be pretty upset with yourself because you just spent a lot of time to do that. If you lose that selection, say I accidentally lose it, I can go back here where there's in my channels, and you'll see my rough selection right here, and I can press Control and click on him. No, not Control. Dang it. control on your computers, command on my computers, because I'm on a Mac and you're on a PC. We'll go back up here. Save my selection. I could press control and click on them and it makes a selection. Controlling and clicking will make a selection out of anything that you have on your layer, right? Okay, so now that I have him roughly selected, I'm going to go back to select and mask. This is how you're going to take this rough selection and you're going to refine it and you're going to make it better and you're going to make it look realistic. So up here, you have different options as to how to view your object. You can view him on an onion skin. You can view him with the marching ants. You can view him on red, which I actually really like to do, is on the red one. On black, which wouldn't be very helpful since he is on a black background for this one. On white, you can view him in just black and white, and you can view him on the transparent background. So that way you can see, you know, what your actual selection is going to look like without a background. I kind of like this because now you can see where the black is and you can tell like that doesn't make much sense. He now has like a black outline and that's from his background, right? Put him back on the marching ants for a second. Let's talk about these. These are tools. The very first one right here is the quick select brush again. So it works just like the quick selection tool back in Photoshop before we were in this window, and plus and minus using the Alt just like before. This is the refine edge brush. This is going to be our most helpful brush for anything like this, like an animal that has fur, or if you're trying to select a person and around their hair and that sort of thing. That's what this brush is for. This is just a brush tool, almost like when you're using your layer masks in Photoshop. It either adds to your selection or subtracts from your selection. It doesn't try to find the edge or anything for you. It just brushes it on the way that you tell it to, okay? These other things aren't going to be very helpful for us. We're just going to use these three up here, okay? Okay, so let's talk about some things over here. Your edge detection, right, will show you what you're working with, right? It shows you where your edge is. Now, for what we're going to do, I'm going to keep this at 0 because I don't want Photoshop to try to find the edge for me. This might help in some situations, but for what I'm doing right now, I want to try to find the edge on my own. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to use the Refine Edge Brush tool, okay? And what I'm actually going to do, let me zoom in for you so you can kind of see. It is actually going to find the edge of where his hair is and where the background is not. And it's actually going to get rid of that black background for me while keeping all the little hairs, because this is what's going to make it look realistic in my montage, in my photo manipulations, right? So I'm using a small brush because I want Photoshop to really understand what I'm trying to do here. So I'm using a smaller brush and I'm going all the way around. And I'm kind of using, well, I am using my, I'm using my tablet, which I highly suggest you doing because I'm kind of painting all of this. I use my tablet for all of this sort of thing. It's just so much easier than trying to use the mouse. Okay. Now you will notice too that I have the plus. I can also hold down the Alt button and do the minus and bring things back if it takes some things away a little too much, right? So you can see how I'm doing this, and I'm going all the way around, right? All the way around and selecting out the edge, and it's getting rid of the black because it's like magic. I want to go up here and do the other side so you can really see how it pulls the little hairs. And if you have a person that has, you know, long flowy hair and you can actually see the background more than just at the edge, but you could see it like in here, it will determine what the edge is, and it will actually keep your hair and get rid of the background. Like, it's pretty amazing that it can do this sort of thing. So you get the picture here, right? We're going to go all the way around. You're going to take your time. You're going to do a really good job, and you're going to refine the edge. I'm going to zoom out and show you. So check out this side versus this side over here with the black edge. Now I want to show it to you on black and white. Look at that. How cool is that? It finds all those little hairs, and you can tell where I didn't do the refine edge brush and where I did do the refine edge brush, right? Pretty stinking cool. So I want to show you what these other things do over here, right? The smooth slider over here actually takes your selection and smooths it on out, which is going to ruin this one because we need to have all those little hairs in there. So this is not something that I would want to smooth. I want to keep all those little hairs. That's what's going to make it look real. But there might be some times where you do want to smooth the selection a little bit. Feathering is actually going to take your edge and blur it. See how it's making it like really fuzzy and blurry, right? And again, for this, not something I want to do for this particular image, but might be helpful for other images. Contrast actually makes it more, actually stands out more, right? Adds the contrast. Again, not something I want to do for this. Shift edge is really great because a lot of times you'll make a selection and you'll look at it afterwards and it looks like it's a good selection, but it has an outline all the way around it. So what you can do with this is you can shift the edge. If you drag it to the left, it shifts the edge inward. See how it's going in a couple pixels, or it's going out a couple pixels. So if you shift it inward, I'll put it back to 0. And then it goes into your selection a bit so that you don't get that outline. And you could type in a number here too. So I could type in 2 for like 2 pixels, right? There you go. And we'll take a look at them on black, on white. There you go. You can see them better. When you're done, you can decide what you want to do with it. I can output it to just a selection. I can output it to a layer mask, a new layer with a layered mask, a totally new document, a new document with a layer mask. So depending on what you want to do, a lot of us I know might just want the selection because we're going to take that selection and drag it on over to something else. And that would be the easiest thing to do, but maybe you want a layer mask as well if you're trying to do something else with it. So, and you could say, okay, it puts it back in Photoshop as that selection, and then you can click on your move tool and you can click on him and drag him out and put him wherever else you might want him to be. And then we'll talk later about next steps to making your montages or manipulations. But your first step is always to make a good selection. So it takes a little bit of time to clean it up and make a really good selection. But if you don't make a really good selection, then you don't have a good photograph to start with, and it's going to be very obvious that you're trying to combine things and put things together. So take your time and do a good job on your selections.